I stood there, frozen, the weight of my suitcase in my hand as the door slammed shut. My own son told me, "This is just temporary, Mom." They shoved me into the garage as if I were nothing more than a burden to be tucked away. But when I walked back into that house, they would see just how wrong they were. I was their mother, not someone they could discard. We're about to begin. But if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence, it lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The door clicked shut behind her with a hollow finality, sealing Marjorie Hale into the garage like an afterthought. She stood there for a moment, letting her eyes adjust to the dim light filtering through a dusty window near the rafter. The air smelled faintly of gasoline and old paint, undercut by something sour, like damp cardboard left too long in the dark. A single bulb swung from a cord overhead, flickering with the nerve of a dying star. "I put the cot over there," Kevin said behind her, pointing toward the back wall as if giving a tour of a motel room. "You can put your suitcase under it." The cot wasn't a bed. It was a punishment, thin, metal-framed, and visibly bowed in the middle like it had already given up on anyone sleeping soundly. A folded, scratchy army blanket sat on top, uninviting. Marjorie didn't move toward it. Dana stood in the doorway, arms crossed, lip glossed. "We just need to make space, Marjorie. It's not like we're kicking you out. Think of this as transitional." Kevin laughed, nervously. "Exactly. Temporary, until things settle down." Marjorie met their eyes without blinking. "Of course," she said softly. Sophie hovered in the hallway behind them, half shielded by the doorframe. Her brown eyes, so much like Marjorie when she was that age, looked panicked and guilty, shifting from her father to her grandmother like she was witnessing something she didn't have words for. Dana caught the glance and turned, her voice tight. "Sophie, go finish your homework." "But," the girl started. "Now." Sophie's lips pressed together. She retreated up the hallway in silence, but not before Marjorie caught the flicker of helplessness on her face. Once they were alone, Marjorie stepped forward and slowly lowered herself onto the cot. It creaked beneath her weight, metal scraping against concrete. She looked around. Boxes labeled Kmaz stacked haphazardly behind a leaking water heater. A rusted lawnmower parked like a forgotten relative. Someone had leaned a broken mirror against the far wall. She could just make out her reflection, stooped, pale, hair pinned neatly back like always. A ghost in storage. Kevin cleared his throat. "We'll let you get settled. If you need anything, well, just knock," Dana added. "Or don't. Give us some space too." The door shut again. This time, it didn't click. It thudded. Marjorie sat still, letting the quiet fill in around her. The cold seeped through the cot's thin mattress and crawled up her spine. She rubbed her hands together, not for warmth, but to feel something familiar. Her own skin, her own rhythm. Across the room, a calendar from 2018 still hung on a nail above the toolbox. September. A smiling Labrador on a porch swing. She let her gaze linger there, remembering when calendars mattered, when she and Walter would write in each other's birthdays and dinner date, back when there were still reasons to keep track of time. Her fingers curled in her lap. Dana hadn't even tried to hide the malice. She hadn't needed to. Or permanent, Dana had said. They didn't think she'd fight back. They thought she'd go quietly, fold into the shadows like old furniture no one had the heart to throw out. But she wasn't made of splinters. She was made of something harder. "I've lived through worse," she whispered. The words didn't need to be loud. They weren't for Kevin or Dana. They were for herself. A quiet inventory of the battles she'd already survived. Poverty, the loss of Walter, breast cancer at 6. She still remembered waking up alone after her mastectomy and laughing, because she realized she wasn't scared anymore. She scanned the garage again, noticed every object, every weakness. The dripping pipe above the stacked boxes, the location of the electrical outlet near the door, the way the door handle turned slightly to the right before clicking shut, the odd red stains on the floor near. She wasn't just looking, she was logging it. Planning had always been her way through powerless. She reached over to her handbag, pulled out her Bible, and set it on the small folding chair beside. Inside were her reading glasses, a pen, and a zippered pouch of old letters, bills, receipts, her paper trail, organized not out of sentiment, but survival. In the distance, she heard laughter echo down the hallway. Kevin's voice, Dana's laugh. The house felt like it was miles above her, not feet. 2 levels up, and an entire life away. Outside, wind rustled through dry leaves along the side. Autumn coming early this year. Marjorie pulled the blanket over her knees and stared at the crack beneath the garage door. A thin line of light glowed there, just bright enough to make the shadows darker. She didn't cry. Instead, she reached for the pen. The cold came in waves, first as a numbness in her fingers, then as a slow ache in her knees. By midnight, it had settled into her bones like a tenant with no intention of leaving. Marjorie lay still beneath the army blanket, eyes fixed on the corrugated ceiling above. The single bulb had burned out an hour earlier, finally giving up its flickering protest. In the dark, the garage felt deep, like it had swallowed the night and grown into something cavernous. A soft plink echoed through the silence, followed by another. She turned her head. Water dripped from the pipe above the stacked boxes to her left, rhythmically, almost deliberately. The cardboard sagged beneath the moist, one box already dark and collapsing. She could smell the mold beginning, sharp and bitter. She squinted. There, on the side of one box, written in black Sharpie, photos. Her breath caught. She swung her legs off the cot, joints stiff from the cold, and walked slowly toward it, careful not to step on a rake half hidden beneath a tarp. Her slippers slid slightly on the She lowered herself to her. The lid of the box was damp and soft at the edges. She peeled it back and went. The water had already seeped through the top album. The cover stuck slightly as she opened it. Inside, black and white snapshots curled at the edges, Walter on their front porch, holding up the first tomato of the season like it was a trophy. Marjorie in her blue skirt suit, squinting against the sun after her first day working the front desk at Emerson Elementary. Sophie, just a toddler then, holding Marjorie's hand at the zoo, both of them laughing at something off camera. She touched the edge of the photo gently, then turned the page, and stopped. The next image had bloomed with mildew. Sophie's second-grade play, the one where she'd played the moon, gone in a halo of black and green rot. A floorboard creaked near the door. Marjorie turned, still crouched by the box. A soft rustle followed, then a whisper, "Grandma?" Sophie slipped in through the side door, bundled in an oversized hoodie. Her hair was loose, messy, like she'd gotten up from bed without turning on the light. "Close the door," Marjorie. Sophie pushed it gently until it latched, then crossed the room in 2 quick steps and knelt beside her. She looked down at the open box. "They just shoved it in here," she said. Her voice was small, trembling. "Your stuff," like it was trash. Marjorie closed the album gently and placed it on top of the stack. "Things can be replaced," she said. "But you can't," Sophie whispered, and her eyes filled with tears. Marjorie reached up, brushing a lock of hair from her granddaughter's. "Don't cry. Not for me." Sophie blinked hard. "It's not fair. You shouldn't be out here. You had surgery. Dad he just lets her do whatever she wants." There was anger in her, buried under the guilt. Marjorie recognized that same spark lived in her too. It just hadn't been lit yet. "Listen to me," Marjorie said gently. "Life doesn't give fairness. You have to notice what it gives instead." "Like what?" "Like clarity." Sophie tilted her head. Marjorie leaned closer. "Now I know exactly," she said. "That's useful. I don't have to pretend anymore." She smiled, not kindly, not warmly, but like someone finding the edge of a weapon they thought they'd lost. Sophie looked over her shoulder. "I should go. If she hears me, go." Marjorie nodded. "But remember what you saw, and where they put me." Sophie hesitated, then stood. "I'll check on you tomorrow." She disappeared through the door as silently as she came. Marjorie sat for a moment, staring at the closed door. Then she turned back to the ruined box. She reached into the corner and pulled out another album. The plastic sleeve was warped, but inside were more memories, some safe, some lost. She placed the albums beside her Bible and sat down at the cot again. The cold didn't bother her as much now. She had work to do. Her hand slipped beneath the mattress, pulling out the notebook she'd started the night. She clicked the pen softly and wrote, "Told I'm lucky to be included. Meals skipped twice." Clocked it. Dana laughing at the box labeled photos. Sophie sees everything. Silence. She paused, then added, "Humiliation is a tool. Don't waste it." Outside the wind picked up, rattling something loose on the siding. But inside, the silence thickened with purpose. The public library didn't open until 10, but Marjorie was already waiting on the bench outside by 9. The chill still clung to her coat. Thin wool, too light for late September. And her fingers ached from gripping her worn leather purse. She watched the glass doors, her breath fogging faintly in the air. When they finally unlocked the doors, she moved quickly, not fast enough to draw attention, but with a purpose that made the security guard nod politely. She nodded back, bypassing the fiction shelves, the children's area, the reading room with its half-dozen retirees flipping through yesterday's Star. Instead, she went straight for the computers in the far right corner, near the dusty microfilm cabinet no one used anymore. She chose the third terminal, privacy was better from that angle, and settled into the chair. The cushion let out a hiss of air beneath her weight. She opened her purse with careful hand and pulled out her small notepad, the pages folded and creased from years of groceries and Sunday errands. This time, though, she flipped to a page marked only with a single line. Bank account. Cross-check all charges. Her login credentials came slowly, typed with deliberate hesitation. She hadn't checked the account since she moved in with Kevin. He had insisted on handling her bills. Simplify things, he'd said, as if autonomy was clutter. The balance popped up. Marjorie blinked. It was lower than she remembered. Much lower. She pulled the transaction page after page of withdrawals, scattered through the last few weeks. ATM locations she didn't recognize. A withdrawal at a liquor store on Washington. One at a convenience mart near Dana's favorite nail. She scrolled back farther. A withdrawal at 3 a.m., just 2 days after her. She closed her eyes for the mouse felt heavier. She clicked print history and walked the few steps to the printer behind the desk, heart tapping against her ribs like it wanted to speak. The papers were still warm when she picked them up. Mind if I sit? Marjorie turned. A woman in a charcoal peacoat and red knit scarf gestured to the chair beside her. Her hair was salt and pepper, pinned up tight. Her gaze was sharp, but not unkind. I'm not in your way, Marjorie replied politely. Didn't say you were. Just thought maybe you looked like someone who needed a minute to breathe. Marjorie studied her. The name tag on her coat read, Helen Briggs, Community Volunteers of Indianapolis. I know your son, Helen added. Or rather, I know of him. Kevin, right? Works at the auto parts distributor? Always parks in the handicapped spot at the rec center, even though he's not. That cracked some. A corner of Marjorie's mouth twitched. That sounds like him. Helen raised an eyebrow. And that paper you're holding like it's a grenade? Marjorie hesitated, then handed over the print. Helen scanned it quickly. Page 1, page 2. She nodded like she'd been expecting worse. Dana's handwriting on the withdrawal slips? She's the only one who ever had my PIN, Marjorie said. Quiet now. She said it was, just in case, when I was in recovery. Helen leaned back. You don't need sympathy, honey. You need a lawyer. Marjorie looked at her, startled. You're not the first woman I've seen parked in a garage. Not the first widow whose kids think her savings come with a headstone. Helen reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a card. She held it up between 2 fingers, steady as stone. Rachel Flores, Elder Justice Legal Aid. She's sharp, and she doesn't flinch. Marjorie took the card and ran her thumb across the embossed letters like they might vanish. Then she folded the printer pages twice, tucked them between the pages of her Bible, and zipped her purse shut. She stood. Helen followed. You going home? For now. Well, Helen said, just know, you're not alone, Marjorie Hale. Not anymore. Marjorie turned to her, surprised. How do you know my name? Helen smiled. Everyone in a town like this knows who's in the garage. The difference is, some of us give a damn. The voices upstairs were muffled, but the tone wasn't. Marjorie sat motionless on the edge of the cot, the Bible resting on her lap, her coat still damp from the walk back from the library. She could hear the distinct cadence of Kevin's confusion, drawn out, reluctant, and Dana's short, sharp syllables slicing over him like a blade. Just look, Dana snapped. A few beats passed, then Kevin again, lower now. We haven't even told her. She doesn't need to know, Dana replied. She's not going back. You want it sitting empty? Market's hot. We'd be stupid not to. Silent. Then a chair scraped again. Marjorie didn't need to imagine the rest. She'd heard enough to know when something was being stolen in plain sight. She stood and walked toward the toolbox. Tucked beneath it, in the stack of labeled boxes, was a small photo frame, the one that used to sit beside the phone in her old kitchen. It held a picture of her front porch in late spring. Blooming peonies, Walter in his Sunday shirt, her with iced tea in hand. That house had held her marriage, her illness, her granddaughter's first birthday. Now it was a draft listing on some real estate site, probably titled something soulless like Charming Bungalow, Move-In Ready. Marjorie's fingers curled tight around the frame. The glass was already cracked. The library phone booths weren't meant for secret, but Marjorie lowered her voice anyway. Rachel Flores, please, she told the receptionist. She told me to call. A short wait. Then a voice came through. Calm, clipped, alert. This is Rachel. This is Marjorie Hale. Helen Briggs gave me your card. A pause, then a shift in Rachel's tone. Yes, I've been expecting your call. Marjorie looked over her shoulder instinctively. The small glass booth felt too open. Her eyes flicked to the library clock. 2:47 p.m. I checked my accounts, she said. They've been draining them. I know. Helen sent me the printout. They're listing my house, Marjorie added, her voice tightening. Do you still have ownership? Marjorie exhaled. Fully. Title's in my name. Another pause. Good. Bring me everything. Every scrap of paper. We'll fight this. Marjorie blinked. Fight? I don't ask clients to beg for dignity, Rachel said. We build a case and make them underestimate. For a moment, Marjorie forgot she was standing in a booth beneath a poster that read, Readers are leaders. She was somewhere else entirely. Warmer, brighter, solid. I'll bring what I have. Tomorrow at 10. My office is downtown. Helen's already on board to drive you. They hung up. Marjorie stood still for several seconds before opening her purse and placing the receiver gently on the hook. That evening, she worked under the flickering garage bulb. She spread her papers across the folded chair like it was a war table. Bank printout, notes from her journal, photos she took of the garage's cracked concrete, the rust-ringed cot, the drip stains near the pipe. She slipped them all into plastic sleeves and slid them into a battered binder that once held Sophie's school drawing. At the front, she tucked in her favorite photo of the porch. Not sentiment, strategy. By the time she zipped the binder shut, her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from energy. Helen's sedan pulled up promptly at 9:15 the next morning. She honked once, polite but firm. Marjorie stepped out in her Sunday coat and clean slacks. She carried the binder under one arm and her Bible under the other. She didn't look back at the house. Helen said nothing at first as they pulled onto the main road. Then, you sure you're ready for this? Marjorie's answer was quiet, but it carried weight. I've been ready. I just wasn't allowed to act like. Rachel Flores's office was on the third floor of a downtown building that smelled like old files and strong coffee. The walls were bare except for a framed quote behind her desk. Power concedes nothing without a demand. Rachel stood when they entered. Tall, clean line, no nonsense posture. You brought it? She asked. Marjorie handed over the binder. Rachel opened it, flipped through the first few pages and nodded once. Then she looked Marjorie in the eye. You don't need pity, she said. You need power. The knock came at 9:47 a.m., sharp and deliberate. Kevin looked up from his laptop, startled. Dana, still in her robe with a half-full mug of lemon water, frowned. Who the hell knocks like that? Marjorie already knew. From the garage, she'd heard the approaching footsteps on the front porch. 2 sets, one heavier, one calm and even, like someone who knew she belonged. Kevin opened the front door halfway, peering out. What? Rachel Flores stepped past him like air through a broken window. Crisp navy blazer, clipboard in hand, heels clicking against the hardwood. Behind her, Officer Luke Carter, uniformed and unreadable, gave a polite nod as he entered. Kevin sputtered. You can't just come in? I can, Rachel replied, not missing a step. And I did. Indiana Statute 2937 allows emergency review upon suspicion of elder exploitation. You've been notified. Dana came into the living room, eyes narrowing. Excuse me? Rachel held up a document, legal-sized and stamped. This is a temporary injunction, signed and sealed this morning. As of now, no assets belonging to Marjorie Hale can be sold, listed, withdrawn, or reassigned. Kevin blinked. Wait, what? That's our house. Officer Carter cleared his throat. It's not. Title records show it's solely in your mother's name. That includes the lot and all its content. Dana's voice pitched. You think a stack of papers is going to stop us? Rachel smiled thinly. Paper's already doing that. Marjorie stepped quietly into the room. Her clothes were clean. Her hair was pinned back, freshly brushed. She held nothing in her hands this time. No Bible, no binder. Just herself. Dana's mouth twitched when she saw her. Well? She sneered. Look who decided to leave her cave. Rachel turned toward Officer Carter. Would you begin the welfare inspection, please? He nodded and headed for the garage. Dana moved to block him, but Rachel raised a hand. Interference with a court-authorized inspection would be considered obstruction, Mrs. Hale. Dana stepped aside, slow and simmering. You have no right. I have the law, Rachel said. That's better. Kevin sat heavily on the arm of the couch, staring at the paper in Rachel's hand like it was a grenade with the pin halfway out. She's just confused. Mom always wanted to stay with us. She even asked to be in the garage, said it was more peaceful. Rachel looked at Is that true? Marjorie didn't. I said it was quieter. not better. Footsteps echoed from down the hall. Officer Carter reappeared with a small digital camera and photographed the living condition. Exposed insulation, no heat source, no running water. I'll be filing a formal welfare report this afternoon. Sophie had come down the stairs quietly during the chaos. She stood now just behind the banister, her hand wrapped around a rail. Her eyes found her grandmother's. Thank you, she whispered. Marjorie didn't smile, but her eyes softened, just a little. Dana crossed her arms. You think this changes anything? Rachel closed her folder. It already has. Dana leaned in, her voice low and bitter. You think paper will save her? Marjorie stepped forward, calm and measured. Paper already did. Dinner that night was half a sandwich and a glass of tap water. No plate, no napkin, just a crust-dry slice of turkey folded between two pieces of bread left on the washing machine. A silent punishment. Marjorie stood for a moment staring at it. The overhead light buzzed faintly. Somewhere above her, a drawer slammed. Kevin's footsteps followed, heavy, deliberate. Dana's voice trailed after him, low and tight with venom. She picked up the sandwich, brought it back to the cot, and set it down beside her unopened Bible. She didn't eat it. She didn't throw it away either. She just let it sit, like a message she intended to later. The temperature had dipped again. No one had bothered to check the thermostat. She wrapped her coat tighter around her waist and opened the binder Rachel had returned with handwritten notes in the margin, legal terms underlined, phrases like pattern of retaliation, withholding necessities scrawled in red ink. By morning, her mail had stopped. What used to be a small stack, mostly junk, and one or two envelopes from her insurance was now conspicuously absent. She checked the box herself at the curb after Sophie left for school. Empty. By the end of the week, Helen called. You still breathing? Her voice rasped through the garage's drafty silence. Barely, Marjorie replied, sitting on the folding chair with the phone cradled against her ear. They've stopped feeding me anything warm. Haven't gotten a letter in days. Helen's voice sharpened. This is textbook. You win one round, they double the cruelty. Marjorie's lips thinned. Then we document every round. Don't break, Helen's. Not now. That night, as Marjorie opened her Bible to slip in more receipts and photos, she found a folded note tucked between the pages. Hang in there. I believe you. S. She blinked, then looked toward the door. It hadn't made a sound, but Sophie had found a way, somehow. The next evening, another note appeared, this time under. They're angry because you stood up. I'm proud of you. Marjorie sat with it for a long time, turning the paper over and Sophie was never leaving her handwriting in plain sight, always signed with just an S, always folded into the spine of something else. She'd even drawn a tiny smiley face in one corner, like she used to on her old math quizzes. Dana had started locking the fridge upstairs. Kevin avoided eye contact altogether. He moved through the house like a man walking across thin ice, saying less, doing more of Dana's bidding. He didn't shout. He didn't curse. He just vanished into the background of his own house, letting Dana tighten the screws. Marjorie wrote everything down. October 3rd, no dinner. October 4th, mail missing. Second day, October 6th. Heard Dana say, "Let her rot," to Kevin. Recorded exact time. Officer Carter began dropping by unannounced. He never stayed long, sometimes just knocked, looked around the garage, made polite conversation, but always left with a note in his little book. Marjorie noticed the way Dana watched him from the window, like she didn't know how. One morning, Carter leaned down beside the garage and, "We're building a file. You just keep doing what you're doing. Quiet is loud in court." She nodded once. The next time Kevin handed her dinner, another cold sandwich, this one soggy with mustard. He didn't speak, just placed it beside her and turned. She stopped him. "Kevin." He froze. She looked up at him, calm. "Everything you do now? It counts. Every act, every omission, every time you walk away." He didn't reply, just stood there for a moment too long before walking out. Marjorie reached for her notebook again. She clicked her pen. At the top of a fresh page, she wrote, "Every cruelty is now evident." The courtroom smelled like dust and cold coffee. Marjorie sat at the front table beside Rachel Flores, spine straight, hands folded neatly in her lap. Her binder rested beside her, zipped shut but dense with weight. The judge's bench loomed a few feet ahead, polished oak, elevated, impersonal. On the wall behind it, the Indiana state seal glinted in bronze. Judge Angela Morris entered briskly, robes swishing. She was in her 60s, gray hair pulled into a low bun, eyes sharp and unsentimental behind rimless glasses. She didn't look like someone who tolerated theatrics. Docket number 22 PB 9047. Petition for emergency guardianship review and financial protection. Hale v. Hale. The clerk announced. Rachel stood. Your Honor, I represent Marjorie. We're here today on an emergency review based on recent evidence of neglect, financial exploitation, and fraudulent real estate actions taken by Kevin and Dana Hale against my client, their mother. Kevin shifted in his seat beside Dana, jaw tight. Dana didn't look at the judge. She stared directly at Marjorie, arms crossed, mouth curled in a smirk. Judge Morris turned to Rachel. Proceed. Rachel clicked her pen once, opened her folder. We'll begin with sworn testimony regarding the living conditions of Ms. Hale over the past several months. Marjorie took the stand slowly, gripping the wooden arm of the chair as she lowered her. She looked smaller there, but not weak, just contained, composed. Rachel stepped forward. Ms. Hale, can you describe your sleeping arrangement since moving in with your son and daughter-in-law? Marjorie nodded. They put a cot in the garage. No heat, no insulation. It smelled of gasoline. No windows that opened. Was this a mutual agreement? No, Marjorie said calmly. I was told it was temporary. It wasn't. Rachel paced slowly. And your meals? They diminished after Officer Carter and Ms. Flores visited the home. Cold food. No stove access. Often skipped. Rachel turned back toward the judge. Your Honor, we've submitted Officer Carter's photos of the garage, including insulation gaps, lack of plumbing, and improper storage. She handed over a manila folder. Judge Morris flipped through the content, her brow pinched slightly. Additionally, we've submitted printed bank records showing unauthorized ATM withdrawals from Ms. Hale's account, several of which coincide with known locations frequented by Dana Hale. Kevin suddenly stood. She said she wanted to be in the garage. It was quieter. She chose it. Judge Morris raised one palm. Mr. Hale, sit down. You'll have your turn. He did, reluctantly, bouncing one leg beneath the table. Rachel tapped another document. We've also submitted a real estate draft listing. Ms. Hale's former home, which she solely owned, found circulating online. It was posted without her knowledge or consent. Dana scoffed, loud enough to echo. Judge Morris looked up. Ms. Hale, something funny? Dana leaned closer to Kevin and, this is a joke. She's playing the old woman card. The court reporter looked up. I need that repeated, Judge Morris said. The reporter obliged. Rachel didn't smile, but her posture straightened slightly. Marjorie glanced over at Sophie, seated in the back row beside Helen Briggs. The girl gave a slight nod, quiet encouragement. Rachel returned to the podium. Given the scope of psychological coercion and financial harm, we're requesting a full audit of Ms. Hale's finance, temporary restriction on access to all shared accounts, and continuation of the injunction against property sale or transfer. Judge Morris tapped her gavel once. Request granted. This hearing is adjourned, pending the outcome of a forensic audit. We'll reconvene in 3 weeks. She looked at Kevin and Dana. I suggest you find counsel. The room Rachel used for casework wasn't glamorous. It smelled faintly of old toner and metal file cap. A narrow window overlooked a parking garage. But to Marjorie, it felt like a battlefield command center, because this was where truth was being sorted from lies. The forensic accountant came twice that week. A quiet man in thick glasses and a corduroy blazer, he barely spoke to anyone as he laid out folders like stepping stones across Rachel's desk. Each document he brought unearthed something new, and each one Rachel tucked neatly into the master binder, color-coded, labeled, and building a case one indignity at a time. Here, he said on his third visit, sliding forward a 2-page report. These transfers stand out. Rachel skimmed the pages while Marjorie sat across from, silent, watching every shift in the lawyer's expression. Rachel's brows pinched slightly as she laid the pages flat and turned them toward her client. Over $4,000, moved in small amounts over 3 months, Rachel explained, all deposited into an account with Kevin's name on it. Marjorie stared at the print. There was something surreal about seeing her son's name next to what had once been her money. It felt like watching someone break into your house in daylight, smiling all the while. Memo lines? She asked. Rachel nodded. Support, shared groceries, home repairs, none of which are itemized anywhere. Marjorie's voice didn't rise. He told me not to worry about bills, that he'd take care of it. Rachel made a quick note in the margin. He did, just not the way you thought. Later that same day, Rachel opened another envelope, a scanned image of a canceled check flagged by the accountant. It was dated 2 months prior and made out for $2,000. The signature, while intended to mimic Marjorie, slanted the wrong way and dropped unevenly. The tail on the Y dipped hard and fast, nothing like her own slow, even hand. Dana, Rachel said flatly. Her handwriting matches a sample she submitted during the response. She forged this. Marjorie took a long, slow breath and folded her hands tightly in her lap. She didn't even try to make it look right, she murmured. She didn't think anyone would ever look. Outside, traffic moved past the window in lazy waves. Inside, Rachel slid the forged check into a clear sleeve, labeled it Exhibit E, Forgery, and pressed it into the binder behind a growing stack of damning documents. By the end of the week, the binder had reached 2 inches thick. Back at the house, Marjorie felt something she hadn't in a long while. Control. It wasn't total. She was still in the garage, still eating cold food, still sleeping on a cot. But something in her spirit had shifted. She wasn't merely enduring anymore. She was documenting, cataloging, preparing. Each indignity now had a place. Each silence from Kevin, each flicker of contempt from Dana. Every night she sat beneath the yellowed bulb, adding to her notes inside the Bible. And now, when she looked at the entry, she saw not just survival, but a narrative that had begun to take shape. One afternoon, Helen called, her voice rough from the wind outside. Rachel told me about the audit. Marjorie nodded into the receiver. It's worse than we thought. Helen didn't. Then they're more exposed than they realized. Marjorie allowed herself the smallest smile. Rachel says we'll be ready in time. There was a pause on the line. You're not just surviving this, you're leading it. The words stayed with her long after the call ended. The next morning, a new email from Rachel came through. Marjorie opened it slowly on the library computer, heart thudding in rhythm with the clack of the keyboard. Subject, hearing date, confirmed. The message was simple. Final hearing schedule, 3 weeks from Friday. All financial evidence admissible. Preparing Officer Carter and Sophie for testimony. Marjorie leaned back in the plastic chair, staring at the 3 weeks. That's all the time left until everything, every cruel word, every cold sandwich, every theft disguised as favor, would be laid bare under oath. The note was left without ceremony. No envelope, no explanation. Just a single sheet of paper, folded in half and slipped under the cot, like something dropped by accident. But nothing in that house happened by accident. Marjorie spotted it as she was changing the battery in her small flashlight. She bent slowly, knees cracking, and pulled the paper free. Her thumb hesitated along the crease. It was cheap printer stock, smudged in the upper corner. She opened it with deliberate care. The handwriting was unmistakable. You need to remember whose house you're in. The next time you try to embarrass us in court, you'll wish the garage was all you lost. There was no name, no signature, but it didn't need one. The loop on the Y in Yule curved sharp and ugly, just like the check Dana had forged. Marjorie stared at the threat for a long moment, her fingers steady, her breath slow and even. She didn't cry. She didn't crumple. She picked up her phone. The message Rachel received came with a photo attached, clear, well-lit, angled to show the floor and the paper side by side. Within minutes, her call came through. Marjorie, are you alone right now? Yes. I need you to hold on to that note. Put it in a plastic sleeve if you have one. Do not confront them. Do not even mention you found it. Marjorie nodded, already sliding the paper of the spare sleeves from the binder. Understood. I'm filing for a restraining order this afternoon. Rachel continued. We'll present the threat at the hearing. You've just given us proof of intent to Marjorie glanced at the cot, then at the small mirror across the garage where her reflection sat calm and sharp-eyed. They thought I'd panic. They don't understand what survival looks like. The following day, Officer Carter knocked on the garage door just after noon. This time, he didn't wait for anyone to answer from inside the house. He'd been granted expanded welfare check authority after the threat was filed. His voice was quiet but firm when he stepped inside. You okay? Marjorie gestured to the folding chair and the now familiar stack of legal folders beside it. Still breathing? Still writing. He scanned the garage. The temperature had dropped again, and the floor felt colder than usual beneath his boots. He frowned at the exposed insulation, then made a note in his small black book. I'll be stopping by every other day until the hearing, he said. We've flagged the address with patrol. You ever feel unsafe? Even for a second you call. You understand? I do. He was almost out the door when he turned back. We believe you. The words hit harder than she expected. That night, Sophie slipped in through the side door, cheeks flushed and eyes rimmed red. Marjorie looked up from her. You saw it? Sophie nodded, silent. He left it on the kitchen counter, she whispered. He didn't even try to hide it. She laughed. Marjorie closed her notebook gently. setting her pen aside. I don't want you caught in the middle of this. I am in the middle, Sophie said, her voice cracking. It's our house, but it doesn't feel like home anymore. Not when they talk about you like you're nothing. Marjorie stood and opened her arms. Sophie stepped into them without hesitation, burying her face against her grandmother's shoulder. Her body shook in silent sobs. Marjorie held her tightly, brushing the girl's hair back with one hand. Listen to me, sweetheart, she murmured. None of this is your fault. You didn't make them cruel. Sophie looked up, eyes shining. I want to help. You already are, Marjorie said softly. Just keep remembering. Don't forget what you. Sophie wiped her eyes and nodded. I'll testify if they ask me. You don't owe me anything, Marjorie replied. But if you choose to speak, you speak your truth. After Sophie left, Marjorie sat down and opened the Bible. She reached for a blank index card and wrote the date in the top right corner. October 22nd. Threat delivered. Handwriting matches forged check. Filed with Rachel. Protective order pending. Sophie read it. She knows. She slipped the card into the inner sleeve with the photo of the threat, sealed it, and laid it on top of the growing stack of labeled evidence. She didn't feel fear. Not tonight. She felt weight and readiness. The courthouse lobby smelled like floor polish and quiet dread. Marjorie sat on a wooden bench just outside courtroom 2A, her palms resting lightly on the binder in her lap. She wore her gray wool coat, buttoned to the throat, and a scarf Helen had pressed into her hands that morning, saying, for power, not warmth. Dana arrived precisely 5 minutes late, heels clicking, lip gloss gleaming, sunglasses perched on her head like she was walking into brunch, not a courtroom. Kevin trailed behind her, face drawn, tie uneven. Rachel didn't stand to greet. She simply rose when the bailiff opened the door. Protective order hearing for Ms. Marjorie Hale, filed October 22nd, the clerk announced. Inside the courtroom, everything felt too bright. Overhead fluorescence. The judge, this time not Morris but a younger man in his 40s, sat behind the bench, flipping through the file as if scanning a grocery list. Rachel stood first. Your Honor, we're here today because my client, Ms. Hale, received a written threat following the filing of a financial exploitation complaint. The note was placed in her living space. I've submitted a photo of the note, along with handwriting samples for comparison. The judge raised an eyebrow. From whom? Dana Hale. We've matched the note to her prior filing. Same slant, same pressure, same curvature of lowercase letters. Specifically, the Y in Yule. Dana stood. That's ridiculous. Anyone could have written that. It's a piece of paper without a name. Rachel didn't flinch. Yes, a threat without a name, which is exactly how cowards communicate. Kevin shifted in his seat but said nothing. Dana smirked. She just wants attention. She's been inventing drama ever since she got here. The judge leaned forward. Ms. Hale, Dana, I advise you to take this serious. If I determine this note constitutes a credible threat, you'll be subject to the terms of an immediate. Rachel stepped forward, placing the original note in a clear evidence sleeve onto the podium. This was found beneath her cot. The same night a financial audit revealed over $40,000 siphoned from Ms. Hale's account. This isn't drama, it's retaliation. The judge reviewed the photo, then compared it with the handwriting sample side by side. There was a long pause. Then, protective order granted, effective immediately. Dana Hale is not to contact or approach Ms. Hale in any form, verbal, physical, written, or digital, pending further court review. Dana gasped, but it was Kevin who muttered, "You've got to be kidding me." The gavel came down once, crisp and final. That afternoon, they reconvened in courtroom 3C, this time under the stern eye of Judge Angela Morris. Marjorie sat taller the weight of the binder balanced on her knees like armor. Sophie and Helen sat in the gallery behind her, Rachel to her left, still and razor-focused. Let's proceed with the audit finding, Judge Morris instructed. Rachel stood smoothly. Your Honor, over the last 3 weeks, a forensic review of Ms. Hale's bank records revealed irregular activity amounting to $40,632 in unauthorized transfers and check payments. She turned and clicked a small remote. The monitor beside the judge's bench lit up with a spreadsheet, transaction dates, amounts, account number, all color-coded in red. These funds were transferred incrementally to accounts held jointly or solely by Kevin Hale. In addition, one forged check, signed by Dana Hale, was traced and confirmed by handwriting analysis. Kevin's face drained of color. I didn't know she was doing that, he said quickly. I thought Mom was okay with it. She told me not to worry about bills. Rachel turned her head slightly. You were withdrawing funds before she ever moved in. Dana, silent now, glared straight ahead. Judge Morris spoke, her voice low but firm. Based on these findings, I'm issuing an immediate freeze on all joint accounts associated with Marjorie Hale. Inheritance claims from Kevin and Dana Hale are to be suspended, pending outcome of the final hearing. The injunction on the real estate list is in place. She paused. And let me be very clear. Any attempt to interfere with Ms. Hale's access to necessity, mail, food, personal safety, will be considered a violation of this court's protection, and contempt will be met accordingly. Marjorie didn't move. She didn't need to. She simply inhaled, slow and full, and let the air settle in her chest like weight shifting off old bone. She looked down at the table. Her hands weren't shaking. It started with one folding chair in the back row, then two, then five. By the time the hearing resumed, the courtroom wasn't just filled with lawyers and family, it was filled with neighbors. Marjorie recognized faces from years ago. Mrs. Tilly from 3 doors down, who always walked her terrier in a pink fleece. Mr. and Mrs. Sloan, who'd once helped shovel her driveway after Walter's second heart surgery. Even Deacon Lawrence from First United Methodist, standing tall and nodding solemnly as she walked in. They had come not for spectacle, but for Judge Morris called the court to order with her usual brisk, but even she glanced once at the unusually full gallery before adjusting her glasses. Rachel, ever composed, stood and addressed the court. Your Honor, with your permission, we'd like to submit 3 community witnesses and 1 notarized pastoral. Judge Morris gave a small nod. Proceed. The first speaker was an older woman with a cane and steady voice. I walk my dog every morning at 7 a.m. Mrs. O. Tilly began. For at least a month, I saw Miss Hale sitting in her garage wearing a coat. Middle of October, sometimes reading, sometimes just sitting. Rachel asked gently, did you ever see a heater? Or light? Mrs. Tilly shook her head. No, ma'am. Just her and that thin blanket on her lap. I thought maybe they were renovating inside. Kevin shifted in his gaze locking forward. Dana crossed her legs too fast and nearly lost a heel. Next, Deacon Lawrence stepped forward with a crisp sheet of paper in hand. This letter was drafted on behalf of our congregation, he said. Ms. Hale has been a member of our church for over 30 years. She taught Sundays. She volunteered at the pantry. The fact that she had to come to us for help, quietly, humbly, was an alarm bell we didn't want to ring too loudly. But we're ringing it now. He handed the document to the bailiff, then looked directly at Marjorie, and gave her a nod before stepping back. Rachel turned to the final item. And lastly, we submit a handwritten statement from Ms. Hale's granddaughter, Sophie Hale. She is 16 years old. This is her voice. She unfolded the page and began to read aloud. I used to think being silent was being safe. I thought if I didn't say anything, no one would get hurt. But silence hurts too. I watched my grandmother sleep in a garage that smelled like gasoline. I watched my parents pretend like it was normal. I was told not to ask questions, but I remember her cooking me pancakes when I had the flu. I remember her teaching me how to hold a pencil right, and I remember how quiet she looked when no one else was. My grandmother deserves better than this. She always did. There was a moment of silence when Rachel finished. Even the court reporter looked up from her keys. Kevin stared at the table, unmoving. His hands gripped the sides of his chair. Dana rolled her eyes, but her face had lost its usual shine. Rachel turned toward the bench. Her voice was calm, but cut with even her own child sees it. For the first time that day, Judge Morris let the silence stretch. She looked down at the statement again, then back at Marjorie. What's clear is that Ms. Hale has endured conditions that this court finds deeply concerning, not only legally, but morally. Marjorie she didn't have to. She sat still in her chair, scarf tucked just so, hands folded neatly over her lap. And for the first time in weeks, she breathed, not shallow or cautious, but fully, a breath that came from her belly, a breath that carried dignity. In the gallery behind her, Sophie sat forward, eyes shining but dry. Helen placed a steadying hand over hers. The hearing wasn't over yet, but something had shifted, and everyone in the room knew it. The front page headline wasn't large, but it didn't have to be. Local family faces elder abuse allegations amid probate dispute. Byline, Lindsay Calloway, staff report. Underneath, a photo of the county courthouse sat in stark black and white, with 2 figures partially visible exiting the side entry. Kevin's shoulder, Dana's blurred profile, turned sharply away from the camera. Marjorie sat at the dining table's kitchen, the newspaper folded neatly in front of her. She had read the article 3 times, not because she didn't believe it, but because the truth, out in the open, in print, with timestamps and quotes and names, felt like air in her lungs after too long underwater. Helen poured coffee behind her, the soft clink of the spoon stirring sugar the only sound in the room for a "Town's going to eat this alive," she said, sliding into the chair across from Marjorie. Finally, something real in that paper. The article was clear and balanced, but it didn't soften. It included quotes from Officer Carter, references to the protective order, and testimony excerpts from Sophie's statement and the church letter. There was no direct photo of Marjorie. Rachel had ensured that, but her name was there in black ink, spelled correctly and spelled fully. She touched the edge of the page. "I thought I'd be ashamed to see it, but I'm not." Helen grunted softly. "You've got nothing to be elsewhere." The impact was immediate. By noon, Kevin's supervisor had called him into a closed-door meeting. The community center where he oversaw outreach programs had started receiving phone calls, quiet at first, then louder. A few parents pulled their kids from after-school tutoring. One local business rescinded a partnership. Kevin tried to explain, but the program director's face had already closed off. "Until the legal matter is resolved," he was told, "we'll be limiting your involvement." Dana fared no better. Her Pilates instructor canceled her next class to regroup staff. Her Tuesday lunch group never replied to her RSVP, and when she bumped into Cheryl Langford at the grocery store, she was met with a tight smile and an excuse about frozen vegetables thawing. The community had been polite for years. That politeness was now gone. At school, Sophie found herself suddenly insulated. Ms. Jacoby, the school counselor, pulled her from gym class for a chat, offering a cup of hot cocoa in a paper cup and a closed door. "You're not in trouble," she said immediately, "but if you ever want space or a place to be quiet, we've got one. Your name doesn't need to be in any article for people to know you're navigating something difficult." Sophie nodded, fingers curled around the cup. "I just don't want people to talk about her like she's a victim." Ms. Jacoby's voice softened. "Then tell them she's a fighter. That's what I see." Meanwhile, in the quiet sanctuary of First United Methodist, Marjorie sat in the second pew from the front, head bowed beneath the muted stained glass light. It was Tuesday morning. No one else was there but the custodian humming faintly in the back and the creak of the old church fan rotating overhead. She didn't ask for anything in her prayer. No retribution, no favor, just stillness, just strength. She folded her hands, not as a plea, but as a pause. A moment to remind herself that she had not only survived this storm, but was now walking directly through it with her eyes open. Later that afternoon, in Rachel's office, the closing arguments, Rachel stood before the whiteboard, sleeves rolled to her elbow, legal pads stacked to her left. Every key date was underlined, every piece of evidence labeled in red and blue. "The narrative is clean," she said. "Financial motive, pattern of neglect, threats, community testimony, child witness. It's all here. This isn't a he said she said. This is a wall of proof." Marjorie didn't sit. She stood beside the board, reading every word, nodding slowly. Her coat was still buttoned. Her scarf hung loose around her neck like a banner. "How long?" she asked. 4 days, Rachel replied. "That's when we go to final argument." Marjorie looked at the board again. Her name sat at the center, circled twice. Everything led outward from it. She didn't flinch. The courtroom was quiet, so quiet. The sound of the judge's pen clicking against the bench echoed like thunder. Marjorie sat still, back straight, her hands resting on her lap atop the same binder that had followed her through every hearing. The scarf Helen had given her was looped loosely around her shoulders today, less like armor now, more like closure. Kevin and Dana sat across the aisle. He looked pale and worn, his tie loose, dark circles clinging to his eyes. Dana still wore her makeup, still wore heels, but her lips were pressed together in a sharp, unyielding line. Her jaw twitched every few seconds. She hadn't looked at Rachel once. Sophie sat with Helen in the gallery. She gripped her knees tightly, her school bag tucked under the bench like a child holding on to something to feel real. Judge Morris entered without ceremony. She didn't glance around the room. She didn't adjust her robe. She simply sat, opened the folder before her, and spoke. "This court has reviewed all evidence submitted in the matter of Hale versus Hale, including financial records, sworn testimony, forensic audit reports, and community witness statement." Her voice was calm but cutting, like wind over ice. "What stands before us is not merely a legal breach, but a moral one. Ms. Marjorie Hale, the petitioner, experienced a pattern of neglect and exploitation from the very people entrusted. Kevin swallowed hard. Dana's mouth opened as if to interject, but Rachel didn't move. She simply placed one hand gently over Marjorie's binder. Judge Morris continued, Kevin Hale and Dana Hale are hereby found responsible for financial exploitation under Indiana Code 3546-112. They are ordered to repay the sum of $40,630 in restitution, jointly and severally, to Ms. Hale's estate. Dana gasped. Kevin buried his face in his. In addition, the judge said, her tone sharpening, both parties are to be removed from any current or future inheritances involving the estate of Ms. Hale. This includes all property, assets, and proceeds thereof. A beat passed. Rachel turned slightly, just enough to see Marjorie's face. Not shocked, not even satisfied, just still, whole. Guardianship, Judge Morris went on, is hereby denied in perpetuity. All prior applications or petitions made by the respondents are null and void. She looked up, eyes landing squarely on Dana. You, Ms. Dana Hale, have also violated the terms of the temporary protective order by attempting to intimidate the petitioner through a written threat. This court finds sufficient grounds to extend the protection order for a period of 3 years, effective immediately. Dana's voice cracked before she could stop it. This is a joke. The judge didn't look at her. This is justice. Finally, she turned toward Rachel. The court thanks counsel for the thorough and respectful handling of this case. One final matter. Ms. Sophie Hale's statement and testimony were submitted with maturity beyond her years. The court recommends ongoing counseling support through the school district to ensure she has the space and support she deserves. Sophie exhaled sharply, half relief, half held back emotion. Judge Morris gave a single nod. This case is now closed. The gavel came down. There was no applause, no eruption, just breath, slow, collective, the kind that comes after holding in too much for too long. Kevin remained seated, stunned. Dana stood abruptly, heels clicking too loudly on the polished floor. Her lipstick had faded, her hands were shaking, but Marjorie didn't look at them, not once. She turned toward the gallery instead, met Sophie's eyes, and gave the smallest of nods. Outside the courthouse, the sun had broken through the clouds, a late November light, cool, golden, real. Helen took Marjorie's arm as they stepped down the courthouse steps. Rachel walked just behind them, phone already buzzing with reporters asking for comment. She said nothing. At the bottom of the stairs, Marjorie paused. She looked out toward the parking lot, where the car waited. The wind tugged gently at her. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small folded note, Sophie's handwriting, one she'd kept from weeks earlier. I'm proud of you. I remember everything. Marjorie tucked it back into her pocket. Later that evening, back at Helen's, she sat by the window with a cup of tea and her open. Her pen moved slowly, steadier now, more deliberate. She wrote, November 17th, judgment rendered. They took money. They lost more. Sophie still visits. The garage is empty. My home is not. She closed the notebook and laid it beside the Bible. Outside, the sky faded into, and Marjorie Hale, for the first time in a long time, felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The key turned more easily than she remembered. Marjorie stepped into the front hallway of her old house, her house, with both hands steady on her cane, eyes sweeping across the familiar grain of the wood floor, the pale crown mold, the muted light slanting in through the east-facing window. The space smelled faintly of lavender and lemon polish. There were no boxes, no realtor signs, no sounds of Dana pacing the kitchen in sharp heels or Kevin tapping at his phone with that constant humming guilt. It was quiet, but it wasn't empty. The living room had been gently returned to itself. Helen had overseen the cleanup. She and Lydia Marks from church had spent the last 2 days putting things right. The curtains had been washed, the couch cushions plumped, the old needlepoint pillow that read, "Bless this nest," had been stitched back into its usual. Even the porcelain bird that once sat on the mantel had been dusted and set just so. Marjorie moved carefully into the center of the room. Her footsteps didn't echo like they did in the garage. The warmth here wasn't just, it was memory. She stopped near the fireplace, laying her Bible and the thick, weathered binder beside one another on the mantel. The two objects that had carried her through, scripture and evidence, prayer and proof, faith in one hand, facts. The front door creaked open behind her. Knock! Knock! Helen called, stepping in with Lydia close behind. Both carried paper bags filled with pastries and tea tins and what looked like a casserole dish covered in foil. We come bearing celebratory carbohydrate. Lydia grinned. Helen leaned in and kissed Marjorie's cheek, lingering for a second before she pulled away. This place missed you, she said quietly. I missed it, Marjorie replied, her voice soft but sure. They moved into the kitchen to set things down, the scent of cinnamon and butter wafting up like a blessing. Marjorie remained in the living room for a moment longer, letting the stillness settle around her like a coat she didn't have. A knock came, light and fast. She turned. Sophie stood on the porch, backpack still on her shoulder, cheeks flushed from the cold. She didn't wait for permission, just opened the door and stepped in like she'd done 100 times. Without a word, she walked across the room and wrapped both arms around Marjorie's waist. I knew you'd come back, Sophie whispered. Marjorie held her tightly, hand smoothing down her granddaughter's hair, the rhythm natural and familiar. I never left, she said. Not really. They stood that way for a long time until Sophie finally pulled back, eyes rimmed with tears she refused to let fall. Rachel arrived just after 4, sharp as ever, briefcase and legal pad tucked beneath her arm. Final signatures, she said, spreading the pages across the dining table. Deed, estate transfer, power of attorney override, account reallocation. Everything's locked down. They can't touch a dime or a doorknob. Marjorie signed slowly, deliberately. Rachel notarized each sheet with clean efficiency, then gathered the files into a sleek black folder and snapped it. It's done, she said. Marjorie nodded. Thank you. Rachel didn't smile, she never really did, but her eyes warmed as she placed the folder gently beside the casserole dish. Just as she was about to leave, a second knock echoed through the front door. This time it was Officer Carter. In uniform, no notebook. I heard the news, he said, stepping inside, removing his. Thought I'd stop by. You're off duty, Marjorie said with a raised brow. He grinned. What can I say? Some calls are worth making anyway. He glanced around the room, then nodded once. This looks like home. Marjorie looked around too. At Sophie on the couch beside Helen, at Lydia pouring tea, at Rachel gathering her files, at the light coming through the windows. She walked slowly back to the mantel and stood before it, her fingers brushing lightly over the Bible, then the binder. Then, in a whisper not meant for anyone but herself, she said, safe. And for the first time in months, the word didn't feel like a wish. It felt like the truth. The lights in the auditorium were warmer than she expected, soft, golden, diffused across the rows of folding chairs and expectant faces. The stage was modest, nothing grand, just a wooden podium, a small mic, and the slow hush that came when people truly wanted to listen. Marjorie stood behind the curtain, her fingers lightly grazing the edge of her scarf. Helen had chosen it, deep navy blue with silver threads, elegant without trying. Sophie sat in the front row, eyes wide, feet bouncing softly. Rachel was further back, leaning against the wall near the exit, arms crossed, an expression unreadable, but present, always present. The conference director approached with a gentle smile. You ready? Marjorie looked at her for a long moment, then gave a single, simple nod. As she stepped out into the light, a quiet applause rippled through the hall, not loud, not theatrical, but warm, welcoming, real. She took her place behind the podium, steadying herself on the edge, her binder and Bible resting closed at her side. Her notes were printed in large, careful font, but she didn't look down at them. Instead, she looked out. My name is Marjorie Hale, she began, voice clear and strong. And for 6 months, I lived in a garage. There was no reaction, just stillness, holding breath. I wasn't homeless, I wasn't helpless, but I was treated like I didn't matter. Like I should be grateful for bare concrete and cold sandwiches. Like survival was enough. She let the pause hang, not for effect, for truth. I was told I was a burden. I was told to be quiet, but I kept record. I documented what they hoped I would forget, because I knew silence was the oldest trick in the abuser's playbook. She looked down once, just briefly, then back up. I was not buried in that garage, she said, her voice tightening with fire. I was raised in a courtroom, in a library phone booth, in the shaking hands of my granddaughter who left me notes under floorboards. I stood in a place they didn't expect to see me, and I spoke. A few people in the audience leaned forward. Others already had tears in their eyes. I didn't win because I was lucky, Marjorie. I won because the law exists for the invisible, if you force it to look. I won because I had people who stood with me, friends, a granddaughter, a lawyer who reminded me that dignity isn't something you plead for, it's something you build. At that, Rachel's gaze softened. She uncrossed her arm. Injustice doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it closes a door quietly. Sometimes it brings you a sandwich with no warmth. She let that one linger. But the smallest indignities, when collected, become evident, and evidence becomes action. That's what justice, not revenge, not spectacle, just truth. With teeth, she looked directly at Sophie. I'm here because I want you to remember something, especially the young ones in this room, and the caretaker, and the ones wondering if what they're seeing is bad enough to report. It is. If you have to ask, it is. Her fingers rested gently on the edge of the podium. I don't want to be known as one who suffered. I want to be known as one who stood. I may have been put in a garage, but I left with something no one expected: power. The silence cracked wide into applause, at first tentative, then rising into something deeper. Sophie stood first, then Helen, then the rest. A full hall on its feet, some clapping, some crying, some just nodding like they'd heard something their bones recognized. Marjorie didn't cry. She didn't bow. She simply turned, walked off the stage slowly, each step deliberate, her back tall and her face calm. Helen met her backstage, arms flung wide, tears escaping. You did it, she whispered. No, Marjorie said softly. We did. Sophie came barreling in next, wrapping her arms around her waist, squeezing hard. You were perfect. Marjorie kissed the top of her. You were my courage. Later that evening, back in the living room of her home, Marjorie stood again at the mantel. The Bible and the binder sat side by side. The light was dim. The fire crackled low. She opened her notebook to a fresh page and wrote slowly. They said the garage was where I'd end, but that was only the beginning. Then she added one final line, small, steady, certain. And when they saw who was standing in my living room, it wasn't me they feared. It was the law beside me.